The blinding flash of 1,000 cameras illuminates the most scandalous kiss of the decade. There, on the crimson carpet of the Metropolitan Legacy Gala, stands Alistair Vance, a titan of industry worth billions, his lips locked with a starlet half his age. The world's media holds its breath, capturing the blatant betrayal in high definition. This isn't just an affair, it's a public declaration of war on his marriage. But the real story isn't the billionaire's shocking infidelity. It's what happens 60 seconds later. As the gasps ripple through the crowd, a lone Rolls-Royce Phantom pulls up. The door opens and the real Mrs. Vance emerges. And she isn't crying. She's coming to collect. The air in the Upper East Side penthouse was always the same, thin, cool, and smelling faintly of freesia and sterilized money. It was an atmosphere Serafina Vance had curated, just as she had curated every other aspect of their lives. From the Jean-Michel Basquiat painting that hung opposite a Gerhard Richter, a deliberately provocative pairing she'd chosen to unnerve stuffy investors, to the precise temperature of the wine in the cellar, everything was a testament to her meticulous control. Everything, it seemed, except her husband. Alistair Vance moved through their shared space like a conquering king, inspecting a territory he'd long since grown bored of. He was a man built by headlines and leveraged buyouts, his charisma a weapon he wielded with casual cruelty. Tonight, he was a storm of expensive cologne and restless energy, shrugging on a Tom Ford tuxedo jacket that cost more than the average person's car. "You're not ready?" he asked, not looking at her. His eyes were on his reflection in the floor-to-ceiling window, which framed a glittering, subservient Manhattan. Serafina sat at her vanity, a still point in his whirlwind. She wore a simple silk robe, her back to him. Her own reflection showed a woman of unnerving composure, her features sharp and intelligent, her eyes the color of a stormy sea. For 15 years, she had been the silent architect of his empire. He was the face, the thunderous voice on earnings calls, the ruthless negotiator the papers loved to call the vulture. But she was the strategist, the one who saw the chessboard from above, who understood that true power wasn't in the loud pronouncements, but in the quiet, unseen moves. "The invitation said 8, she replied, her voice calm and even. She picked up a diamond earring, a massive pear-cut stone from Cartier, a gift from their 10th anniversary. A guilt offering, she'd known at the time, for an affair he thought she'd never discovered. She had discovered them all. "I'm going ahead. I have to greet the board members from the Tokyo acquisition," he said, adjusting his bow tie. It was a lie, a sloppy one. The Tokyo deal had closed last week, and the board members were already back in Japan. He was meeting her, Catalina Monet, a name as fabricated as her talent. Serafina had the complete file on her desk in her private study, born Catherine Monaghan in a forgotten town in Ohio. She'd come to New York with dreams bigger than her portfolio. Now, she was Alistair's latest and most public indulgence. "Of course," Serafina said, her voice betraying nothing. "Don't let me hold you back." He paused at the door, a flicker of something, annoyance, surprise, crossing his face. He'd expected a fight, or tears, or at least a pointed question. The lack of it seemed to unsettle him more than any accusation could have. For a moment, he looked at the woman at the vanity, this beautiful, placid stranger he'd married, and felt a prickle of unease. He'd always mistaken her silence for submission. It was a fatal miscalculation. "The car will be back for you in 30 minutes, he stated, his tone clipped, reasserting his control. "Try to look happy, Serafina. It's a big night for the Vance Foundation." The door clicked shut, leaving a profound silence in its wake. Serafina stared at her reflection for a full minute, The mask of the placid wife did not waver. Then, slowly, she placed the diamond earring back in its velvet box. It was a relic of a past she was about to incinerate. She reached for another set. Emeralds. Green like poison, green like money, green like the envy she was about to inspire. Her phone buzzed on the marble vanity. A single text from her private investigator, a man named Arthur Graves, a discreet ghost who moved through the city's underbelly. He picked her up. They're 10 minutes from the Met. Are you sure about this, S? Serafina's fingers danced over the screen, her reply swift and devoid of emotion. The board is already primed. The proxies are signed. His arrogance is the trigger, Arthur. Let him pull it. She stood, the silk robe pooling at her feet. Waiting for her was not a dress, but a suit of armor, a custom-made Schiaparelli gown in a shocking, visceral crimson. It was the color of blood, the color of power, the color of a warning. Tonight was not a charity gala for the Vance Foundation. It was a coronation. Her coronation. And Alistair had just sent out the invitations. She had been patient for years, gathering threads, documenting indiscretions, creating shell corporations, and moving assets with the quiet precision of a master weaver. She hadn't just built a safety net for herself. She had woven a cage for him, gilded with his own greed and lined with his betrayals. He thought he was walking onto a red carpet. In reality, he was walking onto a battlefield she had designed, and he had just lit the signal fire for his own immolation. The red carpet at the Metropolitan Legacy Gala was a river of flash bulbs and manufactured smiles. It was the apex of New York society, a place where power and fame bled into one another under the merciless gaze of the world's media. Reporters from Vogue, Vanity Fair, and every major news network lined the velvet ropes, their lenses like the hungry eyes of wolves, searching for a story, a scandal, a single moment of imperfection. Tonight, they were about to get a feast. Alistair Vance's Bentley Mulsanne arrived with the understated arrogance befitting his status. The crowd surged, cameras flashing, reporters shouting his name. He emerged first, a vision of tailored power, but it was the woman who followed him out that caused the first wave of gasps. It wasn't Serafina. Catalina Monet was poured into a silver dress that left little to the imagination. She was undeniably beautiful, with the hungry, sharp-edged beauty of a woman who knew it was her only currency. She clung to Alistair's arm, her smile a mixture of triumph and terror. She was playing a dangerous game, and for the first time, she was playing it on the world stage. They posed. Alistair, smug and proprietary, his hand possessively low on her back. Catalina, preening, tilting her head just so, a starlet in her own grand drama. The questions came like machine gun fire. Mr. Vance, a bold statement tonight. Catalina, are you the new face of the Vance Foundation? Where is Mrs. Vance? Alistair simply smiled, a predator's grin. He was enjoying this, the sheer audacity of it. He was Alistair Vance, the rules that governed lesser men, rules of decorum, of fidelity, of simple decency, did not apply to him. He was about to prove it. He leaned in towards Catalina, his voice a low murmur meant only for her, but observed by millions. They want a show? Let's give them one. And then he did it. He dipped her low, a parody of old Hollywood romance, and kissed her. It was not a peck on the cheek. It was a deep, passionate, deliberately provocative kiss, right there in the searing glare of the cameras. For a moment, there was a stunned silence. The frantic clicking of cameras was the only sound. Then, a collective, audible gasp rippled through the press corps and the assembled socialites. This was beyond a simple affair. This was a public execution of a marriage. It was a declaration that Serafina Vance, the elegant, enigmatic woman who had stood by his side for 15 years, was officially replaced, discarded, humiliated on a global scale. Catalina came up for air, her eyes wide, her cheeks flushed. This was it, the moment she had dreamed of. She had won. She was no longer a secret, a mistress tucked away in a St. Regis suite. She was here, on the arm of a billionaire, being kissed on the most exclusive red carpet in the world. She felt a surge of victory so potent it was dizzying. She mistook the flashbulbs for starlight, the reporter's shock for admiration. Alistair straightened his jacket, a smirk playing on his lips. He looked directly into the lens of a nearby television camera, as if sending a message directly to his wife, wherever she was, probably crying in their cavernous penthouse. "This is my world," his eyes said. "My rules." "No more questions," he announced, his voice booming with authority. He began to guide Catalina up the grand steps of the museum, leaving a firestorm in his wake. The gossip was already spreading like wildfire, phones lighting up across the city, across the world. The king had publicly crowned his new queen. But the story was not over. In fact, it had barely begun. As Alistair and Catalina reached the top of the stairs, a new commotion began at the curb. It was a different kind of stir. Not the fevered frenzy of a scandal, but a wave of hushed, reverent awe. A black Rolls-Royce Phantom, even more imposing than Alistair's Bentley, had glided to a silent stop. The license plate was simple: SV1. A single doorman, looking as if he were greeting royalty, rushed to open the rear door. For a moment, nothing happened. The anticipation was electric. The reporters, sensing a second act, swung their cameras away from Alistair and towards the car. Then, a single leg emerged, encased in a crimson silk stiletto. It was followed by the rest of her. Serafina Vance. When Serafina Vance stepped out of the Rolls-Royce, the world seemed to slow on its axis. The chaotic symphony of the red carpet, the shouting, the flashing lights, the desperate scramble for a story, died down to a stunned, reverent hush. She did not look like a woman who had just been publicly humiliated. She looked like a woman who had come to burn an empire to the ground and dance in its ashes. Her gown was a masterpiece of defiance. The Schiaparelli crimson was so vivid it seemed to bleed into the red carpet itself, a seamless extension of her power. The cut was architectural, severe, with sharp shoulders that spoke of battle armor, and a neckline that plunged with unapologetic confidence. Around her neck was not a delicate string of pearls, but a breathtaking collar of emeralds and black diamonds from Bulgari's Serpenti collection. A serpent coiling around her throat, its head resting near her heart. It was a statement. She was not the victim. She was the viper. Her face was serene, her expression a mask of cool, impenetrable calm. Her hair was swept back in a severe chignon, emphasizing the sharp, intelligent lines of her face. There were no tear tracks, no redness in her eyes. Her gaze swept over the stunned press corps, not with fear or shame, but with an almost pitying authority. It was the look of a queen surveying a crowd of court jesters. She did not rush. She did not falter. She began to walk the length of the carpet alone, her posture perfect, her every movement deliberate and imbued with a grace that was almost terrifying in its control. The cameras, which had been machine guns moments before, were now like the slow, panning shots of a cinematic masterpiece. They were no longer trying to catch a scandal. They were trying to capture an icon. At the top of the stairs, Alistair had stopped, frozen. He turned, his face a mask of disbelief. He had expected her to stay home, to crumble, to call him screaming. He had not expected this. this public, magnificent defiance. Beside him, Catalina's triumphant smile had evaporated, replaced by a look of stark panic. The silver dress that had seemed so glamorous now looked cheap and desperate next to Serafina's crimson armor. The starlet suddenly looked like what she was. A stand-in, a cheap imitation who had been caught playing dress-up in the Queen's castle. Serafina reached the midway point of the carpet and paused. She turned, not towards her husband, but towards the most prominent camera, the one broadcasting live to millions. A ghost of a smile touched her lips. It was not warm, it was a promise, a threat. In that single silent moment, she commandeered the entire narrative. The story was no longer billionaire cheats on wife. It was now, Serafina Vance has arrived. She resumed her walk. As she approached the stairs, the reporters found their voices, but the questions were different now. Mrs. Vance, you look breathtaking. Serafina, who are you wearing? An incredible statement tonight, Mrs. Vance. She ignored them all, her eyes fixed on a point just over Alistair's head. She ascended the stairs, each step a hammer blow against the foundation of his world. When she reached the landing, she was finally face to face with her husband and his mistress. The air crackled. The three of them stood there, a tableau of betrayal and retribution for what felt like an eternity. Alistair's face was a mixture of fury and confusion. This was not his script. She had torn up the pages and rewritten the play with herself as the lead. Catalina, utterly out of her depth, tried to assert her position, tightening her grip on Alistair's arm. It was a pathetic gesture of ownership that only highlighted her insecurity. Serafina's gaze finally fell upon them. She looked first at Catalina, her eyes sweeping over the younger woman from head to toe, with an expression of profound indifference, as if observing a piece of furniture that had been delivered to the wrong address. She offered no anger, no jealousy, only a dismissal so complete it was more insulting than any slur. Then she looked at her husband. She did not raise her voice. She did not cause a scene. She simply leaned in close, her voice a silken whisper that only he could hear, though the world watched, trying to decipher its meaning. "Enjoy your evening, Alistair," she murmured, her breath cool against his ear. "It's the last one you'll have as the man you think you are." Without waiting for a reply, she straightened up, gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod to the museum's director, who was waiting at the door, and swept past them into the gala. She did not look back. She left Alistair Vance standing on the steps, his mistress on his arm, suddenly looking not like a king with his prize, but like a fool who had just been checkmated in front of the entire world. The reporters gasped, not at the kiss anymore, but at the sheer, unadulterated power of the woman who had just owned the entire event. The inside of the Metropolitan Museum had been transformed into a glittering forest of crystal and starlight. The air hummed with the conversations of the world's 1%, a murmur of money and power set to the music of a string quartet. But tonight, there was only one topic of conversation. The drama that had unfolded on the steps outside had followed them in, clinging to the atmosphere like the expensive perfume on the guests' wrists. Serafina moved through the gala, not as a pariah, but as a conquering general. Heads turned as she passed, conversations faltered. The initial whispers of pity for the poor, cheated wife had been utterly silenced by her arrival. They were replaced by whispers of awe, of fear, of intense speculation. A woman who could face that level of public betrayal with such regal composure was not a woman to be trifled with. Alistair and Catalina entered moments later, the mood shifting around them like iron filings to a magnet. Alistair, accustomed to being the center of admiring attention, found himself the subject of furtive, judgmental glances. His allies in industry, men who normally would have rushed to shake his hand, suddenly found their champagne flutes fascinating. The women, the wives of his peers, looked at Catalina with undisguised contempt before turning to give Serafina subtle, approving nods. In the unspoken social calculus of this world, Alistair had made a fatal error. He had been vulgar. His transgression wasn't the affair itself, those were common enough to be boring, but the crass, public nature of it. He had created a spectacle, and in doing so had shown a profound lack of class. Serafina, meanwhile, was holding court. She made her way to a knot of the city's most powerful figures: Harrison Blackwood, the grizzled chairman of a rival investment bank; Beatrice de la Renta, the ancient matriarch of a fashion dynasty and the gala's chief benefactor; and Judge Peterson, a federal judge whose influence was felt from Wall Street to Washington. "Serafina, my dear," Beatrice said, her voice like gravel and diamonds, taking Serafina's hands in her own. Schiaparelli, a choice for a woman who has something to say without speaking. "Beatrice?" Serafina smiled warmly, a genuine smile that reached her eyes. "I thought tonight called for a little color." Harrison Blackwood, a man who had been Alistair's business rival for 2 decades, raised a skeptical eyebrow. "Vance is making a spectacle of himself. Are you all right, Serafina?" This was the moment. The test. Her response would set the tone for the rest of her life. She took a sip of her champagne, her eyes glinting over the rim of the crystal flute. "Alistair has always had a flair for the dramatic," she said, her tone light, almost amused. "He's launching a new venture. I felt it was best he managed his own publicity for it." She paused, letting the implication hang in the air. This wasn't a marital collapse. It was a business divergence. By framing it this way, she wasn't the scorned wife. She was a CEO announcing a demerger. The nuance was not lost on them. Blackwood's eyes sharpened with interest. This was the language he understood. Not emotion, but strategy. Meanwhile, Alistair was trying to regain control. He dragged Catalina toward a group of his board members, a forced smile plastered on his face. "Gentlemen, a wonderful evening." The men, most of them in their late 60s, looked from Alistair to the half-dressed starlet on his arm, and then across the room to the vision of elegance that was his wife, who was now laughing with a federal judge. They exchanged uncomfortable glances. "Alistair," said one, a conservative named Robert Mills. "Quite the entrance." "Needed to shake things up," Alistair blustered, clapping him on the back. But the bravado rang hollow. He was losing the room, and he knew it. Catalina, sensing the chill, shrank into herself. The fantasy was curdling into a nightmare. She had imagined being welcomed into this world, feted and admired. Instead, she was being looked at like an invasive species. Serafina's mind was a whirlwind of calculations, but on the surface, she was the epitome of grace. She remembered a night, 6 months prior, that had sealed Alistair's fate. She had come home early from a charity board meeting, the quiet hum of the private elevator opening directly into their penthouse. She had heard them. Laughter from the master bedroom. Their bedroom. Catalina's shrill, theatrical laugh, and Alistair's deeper, indulgent one. She hadn't stormed in. She had retreated as silently as she arrived, went back down the elevator, and walked for hours through Central Park as dusk fell. The pain was a cold, sharp thing, but it was quickly superseded by a crystalline clarity. The marriage wasn't a partnership to be saved. It was a hostile entity from which she needed to extract herself and her assets. For years, she had channeled her brilliance into his company, her strategies earning them billions. Her name wasn't on the door of Vance Industries, but her fingerprints were on every successful blueprint. That night, she had called Geneviève Dubois, a divorce attorney known less for her courtroom theatrics and more for her reputation as a corporate assassin in couture. Their first meeting wasn't about alimony or dividing property. It was about a hostile takeover. "The prenuptial agreement is ironclad," Alistair boasts, Geneviève had warned in her clipped Parisian accent, sitting opposite Serafina in a discreet law office overlooking the park. "Read Clause 12, subsection B," Serafina had replied calmly. "The reputational damage clause. I had it drafted. It states that any act of public degradation or humiliation that negatively impacts the stock value of Vance Industries nullifies the financial caps on the settlement." Genevieve's perfectly sculpted eyebrows had risen. And how would you prove a direct link between public humiliation and stock value? "By ensuring they happen at the same time," Serafina had said. "Alistair is arrogant. He thinks he's untouchable. He's about to make a very big, very public mistake. And when he does, we will be ready to burn him to the ground." Now, standing in the grand hall of the museum, surrounded by the powerful, Serafina felt the last vestiges of the hurt wife fall away, replaced entirely by the cold, thrilling certainty of the CEO. The party wasn't the end game. It was a public relations move, a brilliant one. She was establishing her narrative, casting herself as the victor before the battle had even officially begun. Alistair thought he was playing checkers. She had been playing multidimensional chess for years, and his queen was about to take his king. While the gala continued its charade of civility, a different kind of drama was unfolding in the silent, illuminated canyons of the financial district. This was Serafina's true battlefield, a realm of algorithms and stock tickers where fortunes were won and lost in nanoseconds. At precisely 9:47 p.m., just as the first course was being served at the gala, an alert flashed across the desk of every major financial journalist in the country. It was an SEC filing, submitted through a labyrinthine series of shell corporations based in Switzerland and the Cayman Islands, all perfectly legal, all masterfully orchestrated by Geneviève Dubois' forensic accounting team. The filing announced that a previously unknown investment consortium, Crimson Holdings, had acquired a 15% stake in Vance Industries. The shares had been bought up quietly in small, untraceable blocks over the past 6 months. But that wasn't the bombshell. The bombshell was Crimson Holdings' stated intention: to initiate a vote of no confidence in the CEO, Alistair Vance, citing erratic and reputationally damaging behavior that posed a material risk to shareholder value. Simultaneously, an anonymous and devastatingly detailed report was leaked to the Wall Street Journal. It outlined a pattern of Alistair's corporate malfeasance, using the company jet for personal trysts, awarding a lucrative marketing contract to a company with deep ties to Catalina Monet, and funneling foundation money into vanity projects. Each claim was backed by scanned receipts, flight manifests, and internal emails. The source was untraceable, but the information was impeccable. It was the entire dossier Arthur Graves had compiled over a year of painstaking work. Back at the gala, Alistair's phone began to vibrate incessantly. He ignored it at first, trying to focus on charming a potential investor. But then his CFO's face appeared on the screen, a look of sheer panic in his eyes. Alistair excused himself, his irritation palpable. He stepped into a quiet alcove, the festive music a mocking counterpoint to the storm about to break. "What is it, David?" he snapped. "This better be important." "Alistair, have you seen the news?" David's voice was strained. "The Journal just dropped a story. It's bad. And there's an SEC filing. A group called Crimson Holdings is making a move. They're calling your character into question, demanding a vote." Alistair felt a cold dread seep into his bones, a feeling so foreign he barely recognized it. Crimson Holdings? I've never heard of them. Who the hell are they? We don't know. It's a ghost. But they have the shares, Alistair. And the timing. God, the timing with what you did on the red carpet. The board is going insane. The Asian markets open in a few hours. The stock is going to get slaughtered. Alistair's mind raced. This was a coordinated attack. Sophisticated. Brutal. It wasn't random. His eyes scanned the crowded room, searching, and then they landed on her. Serafina. She was standing by the large glass enclosure of the Temple of Dendor, speaking with Harrison Blackwood. She looked over at him, her expression unreadable, and then she lifted her champagne flute in a silent, mocking toast. Crimson, the color of her dress. The blood drained from his face. It was her. It had to be her. But how? She didn't have that kind of capital, that kind of cunning. He had always seen her as an accessory, a beautiful and intelligent fixture in his life, but ultimately a dependent. The idea that she could orchestrate a corporate raid of this magnitude was unthinkable. He started towards her, shoving people aside, his mask of charm ripped away to reveal the raw fury beneath. Catalina, seeing him charge across the room, tried to follow, calling his name, but she was just part of the wake of his destruction now. He cornered Serafina against the cool stone of the ancient temple's enclosure. "You," he hissed, his voice low and venomous. "This is you. Crimson Holdings. How did you do this?" Serafina didn't flinch. She took a final, delicate sip of her champagne and placed the empty flute on a passing waiter's tray. She looked him directly in the eye, her gaze as cold and hard as the emeralds at her throat. "You're mistaken, Alistair," she said, her voice dangerously calm. "I didn't do this. You did. You just weren't paying attention." "The money, Serafina. Where did you get the money for the shares?" he demanded, grabbing her arm. Harrison Blackwood stepped forward. "Vance, I suggest you take your hands off her." Alistair barely registered him. His world was tilting, the floor giving way beneath him. Serafina looked down at his hand on her arm with disgust, and then back at his face. For 15 years, every investment strategy, every market prediction, every successful acquisition for Vance Industries came from my research, my analysis. While you were taking the credit, I was taking a commission, a very small, legally stipulated consulting fee that was funneled into a private trust, a clause you were too arrogant to ever read in the mountain of paperwork I prepared for you. She pulled her arm free. "I didn't buy your company with your money, darling. I bought it with my salary. And now," she added, a chilling smile gracing her lips, "thanks to your little performance tonight, Clause 12, Subsection B of our prenuptial agreement has been triggered. The reputational damage clause. The cap on my settlement is now gone. Your personal fortune is next." It was the unseen blade, not a weapon of passion, but a scalpel of pure, cold logic, wielded with a surgeon's precision. He had been so busy with his public betrayal that he had completely missed the private execution that had been happening for years, right under his nose. He had thought he was the vulture, but he had been the carcass all along, and she had just begun to feast. The fallout was immediate and catastrophic. By the time the sun rose over New York, the name Alistair Vance was no longer synonymous with power, but with scandal and spectacular collapse. The Asian markets opened first, and it was a bloodbath. Vance Industries' stock plummeted by 40% in the first hour of trading. The damning Wall Street Journal article had spread globally, and investors were panicking. The story of his affair was now just a colorful footnote to the real narrative. A CEO whose recklessness and poor judgment had made the company vulnerable to a hostile takeover. His public kiss hadn't just humiliated his wife, it had cost his shareholders billions. Alistair spent the night in his office, a modern prison of glass and steel overlooking the city that no longer felt like his kingdom. He was a caged animal, roaring down the phone at lawyers, bankers, and board members, but their voices were distant, wary. The loyalty he had commanded through fear and wealth was evaporating. He was no longer a winner, and in their world, there was no place for losers. He tried to fight back. He issued a press release denying the allegations, calling them a baseless attack by a shadowy corporate raider. But it was useless. The evidence was too specific, too damning. The public, fueled by the delicious drama of the gala, had already cast him as the villain. News channels replayed the clip of the kiss, followed by the footage of Serafina's magnificent arrival, creating a perfect, irresistible narrative of a fallen king and a rising queen. Catalina Monet became a casualty of the war. Her agent dropped her. The lucrative marketing contract was rescinded. She was hounded by paparazzi, but they no longer treated her like a budding star. They treated her like a home wrecker, a punchline. She called Alistair repeatedly, but her calls went straight to voicemail. He had used her as a prop in his own downfall, and now she was discarded. Her 15 minutes of fame had been a public immolation. The definitive blow came 3 days after the gala. An emergency board meeting was called. Alistair walked into the boardroom, the long mahogany table filled with grim-faced men who had once fawned over him. At the head of the table, in his chair, sat Harrison Blackwood, and via a large video screen, patched in from her lawyer's office, was Serafina. She was wearing a crisp, white power suit, her expression neutral. "What is the meaning of this, Harrison?" Alistair demanded, his voice hoarse. "It's simple, Alistair," Blackwood said, his tone devoid of sympathy. Crimson Holdings, in partnership with my bank and several other key institutional investors, now controls a 51% voting bloc. We're exercising our rights. The board has voted. You're out, effective immediately. "You can't do this," Alistair roared, his face purple with rage. "It's already done." Serafina's voice cut through the chaos, calm and clear from the monitor. "Your personal assets are frozen, pending our divorce settlement. The company jet has been recalled. Your corporate accounts are sealed. You will be escorted from the building by security. You are no longer CEO, president, or chairman. You are, for all intents and purposes, a private citizen with a great many legal problems." He stared at her image on the screen, this woman he had so profoundly underestimated. He saw no triumph in her eyes, no gloating, only the dispassionate finality of a business transaction. He had made himself a liability, and she had liquidated him. "Why, Serafina?" he asked, his voice finally breaking, the rage giving way to a raw, bewildered despair. After all these years, why? She was silent for a moment, and for the first time, a flicker of something personal crossed her features. It wasn't hatred. It was a distant, almost academic pity. "You built this prison yourself, Alistair," she said softly. "You just never saw the bars. You demanded loyalty, but offered none. You craved admiration, but respected no one. You saw my love as a commodity, and my intelligence as a tool for your own enrichment. This isn't revenge. It is a market correction." The security guards entered the room. They were polite, but firm. As they led a stunned, broken Alistair Vance from the boardroom he had built, he passed the large portrait of himself that hung in the hallway, the one commissioned after their first billion-dollar year. It depicted him as a titan, a master of the universe. It was the man he thought he was. But as he looked at the image of his wife on the screen, Her face calm and in control, he finally understood the truth. He had never been the Titan. He had only been its gaudy, disposable figurehead. The real power, the silent, patient, and utterly ruthless force, had been beside him all along. And he had been too blind to see it until it was far, far too late. 6 months later, the name Vance Industries was gone, scrubbed from the monolith of glass and steel in Midtown Manhattan. In its place, etched in elegant, formidable lettering, was a new name, Crimson. The transition had been swift and brutal. Serafina, acting as the primary stakeholder of the new controlling interest, had not taken the CEO title for herself. That would have been too predictable, too much like Alistair's own vanity. Instead, she had installed a respected industry veteran to handle day-to-day operations, while she assumed the role of executive chairwoman of the board. Her power was absolute, but it was quiet, strategic, just as it had always been. The press, which had been obsessed with the salacious details of the divorce, quickly shifted its focus. They were now fascinated by the brilliant, enigmatic woman who had outmaneuvered one of the most feared men on Wall Street. Forbes ran a cover story titled, "The Architect: How Serafina Rothschild Built and Reclaimed Her Empire." She had reverted to her maiden name, a name synonymous with old-world financial acumen, severing the final tie to her past life. Her first act as chairwoman was to clean house. She dismantled Alistair's network of cronies, purged the toxic, high-pressure culture he had fostered, and implemented policies focused on sustainable, long-term growth rather than his slash-and-burn tactics. She reinvested in research and development, established a genuine philanthropic foundation that did more than just host parties, and promoted several brilliant women within the company whom Alistair had consistently overlooked. The company didn't just survive, it thrived. The stock, now under the ticker CSON, rebounded and climbed to heights it had never reached under Alistair's chaotic leadership. Alistair Vance, meanwhile, had faded into ignominy. The divorce had been devastating. With the prenup nullified, Serafina's legal team, led by the formidable Genevieve Dubois, had systematically dismantled his personal fortune, proving that much of it was inextricably tied to corporate assets he had misused. He was left with a fraction of his wealth, enough to live comfortably, but not enough to ever wield power again. He sold the penthouse and the Hamptons estate. He was seen occasionally in Europe, looking older, greyer, a ghost at the tables he once owned. As for Catalina Monet, she had disappeared from the public eye completely, rumored to have returned to Ohio, her Hollywood dreams reduced to a cautionary tale whispered at cocktail parties. One crisp autumn afternoon, Serafina stood in her new office, which occupied the same top floor as Alistair's had. She had redecorated completely. The dark, masculine mahogany and leather were gone, replaced with light woods, modern art, this time by female artists, and a sense of clean, uncluttered space. The massive, egotistical portrait of Alistair was gone, replaced by a vast, abstract canvas of swirling crimson and gold. She looked out the window at the city spread before her. It was the same view Alistair had stared at, but she saw something different. He had seen a kingdom to be conquered, a reflection of his own ego. She saw a complex, interconnected system, a network of possibilities, a chessboard awaiting its next move. Her assistant's voice came over the intercom. "Madam Chairwoman, the board from the Singapore solar tech firm is on the line. They're ready to discuss your acquisition offer." A small smile touched Serafina's lips. This was her next move, a pivot into green energy, a field Alistair had always dismissed as sentimental nonsense. It was a move for the future, not the past. "Patch them through, please," she said, her voice calm, confident, and utterly in control. She sat down at her desk, not the oversized throne Alistair had used, but a sleek, functional piece of design. She picked up the phone, her emerald and diamond serpent ring glinting in the afternoon light. She hadn't destroyed Alistair's world out of simple revenge. She had done it to build her own. The red carpet hadn't been an ending. It had been a birth. The fiery, public birth of an empress, forged in betrayal, crowned in defiance, and now ready to rule. A year is a lifetime in a city that never sleeps. For Serafina Rothschild, the past 12 months had been a period of relentless, disciplined reconstruction. The name Alistair Vance was now a historical footnote, a case study taught in business schools on the perils of hubris. Crimson, under her stewardship, had become a behemoth of innovation and ethical capitalism, a stark rebuke to the corporate raiding culture of the past. Her public image was flawless, a phoenix, a titan of industry, a feminist icon celebrated on magazine covers and revered in boardrooms. She had won. The victory was total, absolute, and undeniable. And yet, there were moments, often in the deep stillness of the night, when she would stand in her new penthouse, a marvel of minimalist architecture overlooking Central Park, all clean lines and cool marble, and feel the profound silence. It was a different silence from the one she had shared with Alistair. That had been a silence thick with unspoken resentments and looming betrayals. This was a new kind of quiet, the silence of the summit. The air was thin up here, and she was utterly, completely alone. She had a staff, a board, a coterie of admirers, but no confidants. Power, she had discovered, was the most effective insulation in the world. It was on a Tuesday afternoon, as the autumn light cast long shadows across her sprawling office, that the past sent a messenger. Her executive assistant, a fiercely competent young woman named Claire, buzzed her on the intercom, her voice laced with an uncharacteristic uncertainty. "Madam Chairwoman," Claire began, "I apologize for the interruption. There is a woman in the lobby. She has no appointment, but she refuses to leave. She says she will wait all day, if she must." She gave the name Catherine Monaghan. Serafina froze, her fingers hovering over a tablet displaying quarterly projections. Catherine Monaghan. The real name. The Ohio name. A ghost in a bargain bin dress, rattling the chains of a life Serafina had meticulously demolished. Her first instinct was a cold, swift denial. Have security remove her. It was the efficient, logical move, a loose end from a previous business transaction, now irrelevant. But she didn't say it. A sliver of something she couldn't immediately name. Not pity, perhaps curiosity, or the strategist's innate dislike for an unresolved variable, held her back. What could this woman possibly want? The money was gone. The man was gone. The life she had coveted was a heap of ashes. "Send her up, Claire," Serafina said, her voice betraying nothing of the sudden turbulence in her mind. "See that we are not disturbed for the next 30 minutes. A few moments later, the heavy oak door to her office swung open. The woman who walked in was almost unrecognizable. The brassy blonde hair was now a mousy, natural brown, cut in a simple, unstylish bob. The predatory ambition in her eyes had been replaced by a deep, weary exhaustion. She wore a plain grey coat and jeans. The last time Serafina had seen her, she had been dripping in borrowed diamonds and desperation on the arm of a billionaire. Now, she just looked like a woman who had taken a long, hard fall back to earth. "Mrs. Vance." "Ms. Rothschild," Catherine corrected herself, her voice quiet, tentative. "Thank you for seeing me." Serafina remained seated behind her enormous desk, a slab of polished obsidian, that served as both a workspace and a barrier. She gestured to one of the chairs opposite her. "Please, sit." Catherine sat on the edge of the chair, looking small and out of place amidst the soaring ceilings and priceless art. She didn't look at Serafina, but at her own hands, twisting them in her lap. "I'm sure you're wondering why I'm here," Catherine began. "I don't want money. I know there's none to be had. Not from you, not from him. I needed to ask you something." Serafina waited, her face a mask of polite neutrality. She would not offer an inch of emotion. This was a business meeting. Catherine finally looked up, and her eyes were surprisingly clear. The terror and triumph of that night at the gala were gone. What remained was a raw, painful sobriety. "He told me he loved me," she said, the words simple, unadorned. "He told me you were just a business partner, an arrangement, that you hadn't shared a bed in years. He said your marriage was a loveless cage, and he was desperate to get out. He promised me everything, a career, a future, a family." She let out a short, bitter laugh. "I was so stupid. I know that now. I was a cliché from a bad movie. But I believed him. I believed him because I wanted to. When he kissed me on that carpet, for 1 second, I thought I had won. I thought my real life was starting." Serafina's composure was a fortress, but a flicker of an old memory breached the walls. Alistair, years ago, telling her the same things about his first wife when he had been pursuing her. The same script, the same promises. He wasn't a monster of invention. He was a machine of repetition, finding a new gear to grind with each new person he consumed. "Your point, Miss Monaghan?" Serafina's voice was cool. "My point," Catherine said, leaning forward slightly, her gaze intensifying, "is that I was a weapon. He was using me to hurt you. But you were using me too, weren't you? My file, your investigator. You knew he was bringing me to the gala. You knew he was going to do something stupid and public. You wanted him to. That kiss, it wasn't just his betrayal of you. It was the trigger for your trap. I was the bullet in your gun." The accusation hung in the air, sharp and precise. Serafina did not deny it. It was, after all, the truth. "You made a choice to be with a married man," Serafina stated, her tone clinical. "Choices have consequences." "I know that," Catherine's voice rose, cracking with a year of pent-up anguish. "And I am living with them. My name is poison. My face is a meme for home wreckers. I had to move back to Ohio and work in a diner to help my parents pay the legal fees from the lawsuits your husband's stupid contract got me into. I own my choices. But you sit up here in your palace in the sky, and you pretend this was all just a clean market correction. But it wasn't, was it? It was personal. He broke your heart, and so you broke his world, and mine along with it." For the first time, Serafina felt a genuine crack in her armor. She had thought of Catherine as an obstacle, a variable, a tool. She had never truly considered the human cost for the woman who had been the public face of the scandal. She had dehumanized her rival just as effectively as Alistair had. Catherine seemed to sense the shift. She leaned back, her brief flare of anger spent, leaving only the exhaustion behind. Her next words were not an accusation, but a genuine soul-weary question. "I have to know," she said, her voice dropping to a whisper. "Was it worth it? All this?" She gestured vaguely at the opulent office, the city skyline, the empire at Serafina's feet. "Did it fix what he broke in you? Are you happy now?" The question pierced Serafina with an unexpected force. "Are you happy?" It was such a simple question. yet no one had dared ask it of her in a year. They asked about her projections, her strategies, her acquisitions. They did not ask about her heart. She looked past Catherine, out the vast window at the panorama of her victory. She had power, respect, freedom, and more wealth than she could ever spend. She had avenged herself with a brilliance that would be spoken of for generations. She had everything she had fought for. But happy? Happiness was a warmth, a connection, a quiet sense of peace. Her life was a marvel of engineering, a perfectly functioning, climate-controlled machine. It was not warm. Her connections were transactional, and peace. Peace was a distant shore she had not yet reached. The vigilance never ended. The memory of the betrayal, though avenged, had left a permanent shard of ice in her soul. She had won the war, but she had become a creature of it, forever scanning the horizon for the next threat. She finally turned her gaze back to Catherine Monaghan, to the other woman he had broken. She saw not a rival, but a reflection in a warped mirror, a younger, more naive version of a woman who had once also believed the promises of Alistair Vance. No, Serafina said, the single word costing her more than any billion-dollar deal. Her voice was quiet, stripped of its usual authority, leaving only a raw honesty. It is not a cure for the wound. The victory is in the survival, Ms. Monaghan, not in the spoils. She stood up and walked to a smaller personal desk in the corner of the room. She wrote something on a piece of her personal stationery, folded it, and slid it into an envelope. She walked back and handed it to Catherine. This is the name of a woman who runs a non-profit in Chicago that helps women start new businesses. There is also a cashier's check that will cover your parents' legal fees and your relocation. It is not an apology. It is, as you said, a consequence. You were collateral damage in a war you didn't understand. I am correcting the balance sheet. Catherine stared at the envelope, her eyes welling with tears for the first time. Why? Because my empire is built on sound principles, Serafina said, her voice regaining a fraction of its cool command. And I do not abide loose ends or unbalanced ledgers. Your association with Alistair Vance is over. Your association with me is now concluded. What you do next is entirely your own. Catherine stood, clutching the envelope, and for a moment the two women simply looked at each other across the vast expanse of the office. They were not friends, not enemies, not rivals anymore. They were two survivors of the same shipwreck, standing on opposite shores. After Catherine had gone, Serafina walked to the window. The sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in fiery strokes of crimson and gold, the colors of her brand, of her victory painting. But for the first time, the colors didn't feel like triumph. They felt like a warning, an echo. She had built a fortress to protect herself from ever being hurt again, but she was now its solitary prisoner. She had mastered the world of finance, of strategy, of power, but the quiet, uncharted territory of her own heart remained a wilderness. The battle was won, but she was beginning to understand that the search for peace was a war fought entirely on her own, and it had only just begun. And so, the reign of Alistair Vance ended, not with a bang, but with the quiet, decisive click of a boardroom door. Serafina Rothschild proved that the most powerful move isn't always the loudest. Sometimes it's the one nobody sees coming until it's too late. She didn't just survive a public humiliation. She weaponized it, turning a moment of profound betrayal into the greatest leverage of her life. This wasn't just a divorce. It was a hostile takeover of her own destiny. What do you think? Was Serafina's plan a stroke of genius or a cold-hearted masterpiece of revenge? Could Alistair have ever seen it coming? If you love stories of epic comebacks, brilliant strategy, and seeing power shift in the most dramatic way possible, then show some love by hitting that like button. Share this video with anyone who knows that true strength often works in silence. And most importantly, subscribe to our channel for more stories where the game is played for the highest stakes. Let us know in the comments below. What was the single most powerful move Serafina made? He was a man who had everything: a corner office on the 50th floor, a tailored suit worth more than most cars, and a ruthless ambition that had scorched everyone beneath him. His secretary Clara was just another rung on his ladder, diligent, intelligent, and inconveniently pregnant. When his ambitious mistress, Serafina, wanted Clara gone, he did it without a second thought. He fired her, publicly, humiliatingly. What he didn't know, as he watched her walk away, was that Clara wasn't just his secretary. She was Clara Hayes, the only daughter of the man who owned the entire building, and the reckoning was just beginning. Julian Vance lived his life 50 floors above New York City, and he believed this altitude granted him a kind of divinity. His office at Vanguard Equity Partners wasn't just a room, it was a testament to his arrival. It was a cube of glass, suspended over the city, and from it he viewed the world, and his employees, as tiny, manageable subjects. Julian was a man carved from ambition. At 38, he was the youngest senior vice president in the firm's history, and he wore his success like armor: bespoke Tom Ford suits, a Patek Philippe watch that chimed on the quarter hour, and a smile that was both dazzling and predatory. Outside that glass cube sat Clara Hayes. Clara was, in every way, the antithesis of Julian's flash. She was quiet, methodical, and possessed an intelligence that was as deep as it was unobtrusive. For 2 years, she had been the perfect secretary. She anticipated his needs, corrected his mistakes before he made them, and managed his chaotic schedule with an unnerving calm. She was, as Julian often bragged to his peers, a mind reader. But 6 months ago, Clara had become an inconvenience. She was pregnant. Her body, once neatly professional, was now undeniably round. Her presence, once efficient, now seemed to Julian to be a constant, ticking reminder of biological messiness. He loathed it. It wasn't just the impending maternity leave, a scheduling black hole, he'd called it. It was the visual of it. It screamed weakness. It screamed domesticity. It screamed everything Julian had sacrificed to get where he was. "Clara!" he barked through the intercom, not looking up from his terminal. "My 10 a.m. client notes. Now." "They're on your desk, Julian," her calm voice replied instantly. "I placed them there an hour ago. Open to page 3, where you'll find the discrepancies in their Q3 report." Julian glanced down. There they were. He grunted, annoyed at her preemptive competence. His annoyance was being actively stoked by Serafina Croft. Serafina was the firm's new head of strategic marketing, hired 3 months prior. She was fire to Clara's ice, all sharp angles, blood-red lipstick, and a laugh that echoed with undisguised avarice. She and Julian had fallen into a discreet, then flagrant affair almost immediately. Serafina didn't just want Julian's affection, she wanted his power, and she saw Clara as a stubborn obstacle. Serafina sauntered over to Clara's desk, leaning against it hip first, deliberately crowding Clara's space. She was holding a steaming mug. "Still here, Clara?" Serafina purred, loud enough for the entire floor to hear. "I'm surprised you can still fit behind that desk. You're blooming." Clara didn't look up from her screen. "I'm fine, Miss Croft. Can I help you with something?" "Oh, just admiring your dedication," Serafina said, taking a sip. "Julian is so kind to let you keep working. Most women in your condition would be at home, nesting or something. A few junior analysts snickered. Clara's fingers paused on the keyboard. Beside her, Mary, the older executive assistant for another partner, shot Serafina a venomous look. Mary liked Clara. She'd seen ambitious sharks like Serafina devour good people for sport. "I'm more effective here, Miss Croft," Clara said evenly. "Are you, though?" Serafina shot back. Julian was just complaining that the Sanderson files were late. "Pregnancy brain, I suppose?" Clara's head snapped up. "The Sanderson files are not due until tomorrow at 5. Julian wanted them today. He must have forgotten to tell you," Serafina said, with a fake pout. "Don't worry, I handled it for him." Clara watched her walk away, a perfectly straight seam running up the back of her designer skirt. Clara looked at her digital scheduler. The Sanderson deadline was, indeed, tomorrow. Serafina was lying. She was building a narrative. This wasn't the first time. For weeks, Serafina had been helpfully pointing out Clara's lapses. A meeting missed that had been rescheduled by Serafina herself. A coffee order that was wrong, though Julian had changed his preference that morning. Small, insidious cuts designed to bleed Clara's reputation dry. And Julian, blinded by Serafina's ambition and his own, was letting it happen. Later that day, Julian had a crisis. A major client, the pension fund for the state of Ohio, was threatening to pull their $800 million portfolio. Their representative was on a conference call, and he was furious. "I'm looking at this proposal, Vance, and it's a joke," the man yelled through the speakerphone. "You've miscalculated our exposure by nearly 15%. This is amateur hour." Julian was sweating. He was shuffling papers, his charm failing. "Mr. Henderson, if you'll just let me explain." Clara, listening from her desk, quietly printed a single sheet of paper. She walked into the glass office, ignoring Serafina, who had perched herself on the guest chair, and slid the paper in front of Julian. On it were 3 bullet points. Julian paused. He read them. His posture changed. "Mr. Henderson," Julian said, his voice suddenly smooth as silk. "I haven't miscalculated. You're looking at the projections before we factored in the new federal bond acquisitions. If you'll turn to Appendix D, subsection 4A, which my team prepared this morning, you'll see we've actually shielded your exposure. The 15% discrepancy isn't a loss. It's a hedge that's already paying dividends." There was a silence on the line. "Well, why didn't you say so?" "I prefer to let the numbers speak for themselves," Julian said, leaning back. He won the call. The client was pacified. When he hung up, Serafina ran a hand up his arm. "You were brilliant, Julian. You saved us." Julian straightened his tie, his gaze falling on Clara, who was quietly retrieving the paper. "Clara, get the Henderson contingency file updated, and next time, try to keep up." Clara paused at the door, her back to him. "Of course, Julian." She walked out. Julian didn't see the look on her face, but Mary at the next desk did. It wasn't defeat, it wasn't sadness, it was a cold, calculating patience. It was the look of a chess master watching her opponent knowingly walk into a trap. The trap was being set, but not by Clara. It was being set by Julian and Serafina over $300 stakes at the Onyx Room, a restaurant so dark and exclusive it felt like a vault. "She has to go, Julian," Serafina said, swirling a glass of Cabernet. The crimson liquid caught the light from the single candle. "She makes you look soft." Julian loosened his tie, away from the fluorescent lights of the office. His ambition felt purer, more justified. "She's pregnant, Sarah. Firing her is a legal nightmare. The optics are terrible." "Optics?" Serafina laughed, a low, throaty sound. "We're not talking about optics. We're talking about your future. The partnership. The Asia-Pacific expansion. Do you think David Morrison got to be CEO by worrying about optics? He got there by being decisive, by cutting liabilities." She leaned in, her voice dropping. "And she is a liability. She's slow, she's dowdy, and she's watching us. I don't like it." Julian frowned. "She's a secretary. She's not watching anything." "Isn't she?" Serafina countered. "She saved you on that Henderson call. How did she know that? How was she that prepared? It's like she's auditing you. It's creepy, Julian. And frankly, I want her desk. I want to be right outside your office. I can be your partner in this, Julian. Your real partner. But not while she's there, playing Mother Superior." The image she painted was potent. Serafina, in her sharp suits, sitting guard at his door. Serafina, anticipating his real needs. It was an intoxicating thought. The pregnancy had repulsed him, but Serafina was right. Clara's quiet competence was, in its own way, a threat. It felt like judgment. "Fine," Julian said, his voice hardening. "We cut the liability, but it has to be clean. It has to be for cause." "Then we find a cause?" Serafina smiled, raising her glass. The cause began the next day. It was a two-pronged attack: manufacture a performance issue and sabotage her reliability. The first step was a file. The North Star acquisition was Julian's flagship project, a $2 billion deal. The final signatory papers were due by courier to London by 10 a.m. Friday. This was a hard deadline. Missing it would incur massive penalties. Clara had the package prepped by Wednesday. She logged it for international courier pickup, triple-checked the customs forms, and placed the bright red, wax-sealed envelope in the secure outgoing mail slot. She sent a confirmation email to Julian. "North Star package is secure and logged for 8 a.m. pickup tomorrow, Thursday. It will arrive in London with 24 hours to spare." Julian read the email. Serafina was leaning over his shoulder. "See?" he whispered. "She's on top of it." "It's impossible." "Nothing is impossible," Serafina whispered back. She waited until 5:30 p.m., when Clara, moving a little slower than usual, packed her bag and headed for the elevator. Clara was the last to leave their section. Mary, the other assistant, had left hours ago. At 5:35 p.m., Serafina walked calmly to the mailroom. She flirted with the night shift clerk, asked him to find a lost earring near the sorting table. While he was distracted, her hand darted into the International Secure slot. She retrieved the bright red envelope. She didn't destroy it. She simply slipped it into her oversized designer handbag. At 7 p.m., she and Julian were in his office. He was pacing. "This is insane, Sarah. This is a felony." "It's a clerical error, Julian," she cooed, placing the envelope on his desk. "Clara's error. She must have forgotten to put it in the slot. Look, here it is, sitting on her desk, buried under a memo. She must have left it this afternoon. How tragic. How forgetful." She then moved to Clara's computer. Clara, trusting, had her password saved in a desktop file for Julian, in case of emergency. This, Serafina decided, was an emergency. She logged into Clara's email. She found the confirmation message sent to Julian. "North Star package is secure and logged." Serafina smiled, and with a click of the mouse, she deleted it. Not just from Clara's sent folder, but from the server-side recall. Then, she went into Clara's scheduler and deleted the courier pickup appointment. "There," she said, logging out. "No email, no appointment, just a package sitting on her desk. Missed. A multi-billion-dollar deal, jeopardized by her incompetence. By her pregnancy brain." Julian stared at the package. This was the point of no return. This wasn't just firing someone. It was destroying them. He picked up the package. He opened Clara's desk drawer, the one with her spare sweaters and prenatal vitamins, and dropped the package inside, kicking it to the very back. "It's done," he said, his voice hollow. "Good," Serafina said, kissing him hard. "Now tomorrow, we'll be in the Chicago office. We'll be unreachable. By the time anyone realizes the package never left, it will be Friday morning. It will be too late, and it will be entirely her fault." They left the office, partners in crime. Back in the darkness, the green light on Clara's computer terminal blinked off, but across the hall, a small red light on a ceiling-mounted security camera, the one Julian always assumed was just for show, remained on. It had captured Serafina's 5:35 p.m. visit to the mailroom. It had captured her logging into Clara's computer. It had captured everything. Friday morning was electric with panic. The first call came at 9 a.m., London time, which was 4 a.m. in New York. Julian, asleep in his high-rise apartment, ignored it. The second came at 5 a.m. from his boss, David Morrison. Julian answered that one. "Vance, where in God's name is the North Star package?" Morrison bellowed, his voice cracking with transatlantic static. "Our London team is sitting here with the board, and the documents are not here. The 10 a.m. deadline is in 1 hour. Julian feigned groggy confusion. "What? That's impossible." Clara confirmed it was sent. "Well, it wasn't," Morrison roared. "You fix this, Vance. You fix this now, or your partnership is dead." The line clicked. Julian was wide awake. He frantically called the office. Clara, who always arrived at 7 a.m., picked up. "Clara, where is the North Star package?" Julian yelled, genuine panic now mixing with his manufactured rage. "It's... what?" Clara's voice was instantly alert. "Julian, it's in London. I sent it Wednesday for Thursday pickup." "It's not in London. The courier company has no record of a pickup. Did you log it?" "Yes, of course I logged it. I emailed you the confirmation." Clara was typing furiously. "Julian, the email. It's gone. The scheduler appointment. It's not here." "What do you mean it's not there?" Julian spat. "Did you forget? Clara, did you forget to send the most important package of my career?" "No, Clara was stunned. She was searching her desk, her mind racing. I don't understand. I know I... Find it, Clara. Find it, or you are finished." Julian hung up. He showered, shaved, and dressed with methodical care. He put on his most expensive suit. Today was a day for an execution. He arrived at the office at 9 a.m. sharp. The floor was a morgue. Everyone knew. The North Star deal was dead. The firm would face millions in penalties, but worse, the reputational damage was catastrophic. Clara was pale, standing by her desk, her hands resting on her stomach. She looked defeated. "My office, Clara." "Now," Julian said, his voice devoid of all warmth. Serafina was already inside, sitting in the guest chair, examining her nails. She looked up as Clara entered, a mask of false sympathy on her face. "Clara, I'm so sorry. This is just a tragedy." "Julian, I don't know what happened," Clara began, her voice shaking but firm. "I took that package to the mailroom myself. I logged it. I emailed you. Someone... Julian cut her off, his voice dangerously low. "Or something? Like pregnancy brain, Clara? Is that the something?" Clara recoiled as if struck. "How dare you?" "I dare," Julian said, stepping closer, "because I trusted you. I looked like a fool this morning. This firm is now exposed to litigation and ruin, all because my mind-reader secretary was too busy picking out nursery colors to do her one simple job." "That is not true," Clara said, her voice rising. "I have never missed a deadline. I have never failed you. This is a mistake. This is wrong." It's a failure, Clara. A catastrophic failure, Julian said. He leaned on his desk, the picture of a disappointed, betrayed leader. Serafina was the one who found the package. Go on, Sarah, tell her. Serafina looked up, her eyes wide with mock sadness. Clara, I found it this morning, in your desk drawer, under a pile of baby magazines. This was a lie too far, a vicious, unnecessary embellishment. What? Clara whispered. She physically staggered back. No, I would never. Someone put it there. Who, Clara? Julian laughed, a cold, barking sound. The mailroom gnome? Serafina? Me? Do you hear how paranoid you sound? You're hormonal, you're forgetful, and you just cost this company its biggest deal of the decade. He circled his desk and stood over her. She had to tilt her head back to look at him. I can't have unreliable people on my team, he said. The partnership is expanding. We're moving into Asia. I need sharks. Clara, not this. He gestured vaguely at her stomach. Clara's eyes, which had been wide with shock, suddenly narrowed. The fear vanished, replaced by that same cold, calculating calm Mary had seen before. Julian, she said, her voice quiet. You are making a terrible mistake. No, he said. My mistake was not doing this months ago. You're fired, Clara, effective immediately. Julian, you can't, Serafina said, playing her part. I can and I am, Julian snapped. Performance. Gross negligence. I have more than cause. Security is on their way up. The entire office was watching through the glass walls. They could hear the raised voices. Mary had her hand over her mouth. You're firing me, Clara stated, not a question. Because of a package you know I sent. You're firing me, 6 months pregnant, to give my desk to your mistress. The air left the room. Julian's face went from angry to purple. Serafina shot to her feet. How dare you? Serafina shrieked. Shut up, Serafina, Clara said, her voice cutting through the air like a razor. She never broke eye contact with Julian. You will regret this, Julian Vance. You will regret this more than any other decision in your short, pathetic life. Get her out, Julian choked out, pressing the security button on his phone. 2 uniformed guards arrived. Mr. Vance? Ms. Hayes is no longer an employee. Please escort her from the building. The guards looked uncomfortable. Escorting a visibly pregnant woman out was a new low. Ma'am, if you'll come with us. Clara didn't look at them. She looked only at Julian. She let the silence stretch, imprinting his furious, triumphant face into her memory. Then she turned, with all the dignity she could muster, and walked out of the glass office. The guards followed. Someone had already brought a cardboard box to her desk. She didn't have much. A framed photo, a coffee mug, a small plant. Mary rushed over, tears in her eyes. Clara, I'm so sorry. I know you didn't. It's all right, Mary, Clara said, her voice soft now. It's not your fault. She placed her few items in the box. As she did, her sleeve rode up, revealing a simple, elegant watch. It wasn't a Rolex or a Patek. It was a vintage Cartier, understated, but worth more than Julian's entire collection. No one noticed. She picked up the box. The entire floor was silent, watching her walk of shame to the elevators. Serafina was standing in the doorway of Julian's office, a triumphant smirk on her face. Clara passed her and paused. You know, Clara whispered, just for Serafina. The camera in the 50th floor hallway. It has a surprisingly clear view of the mailroom. You should really fix your hair before you commit a felony next time. Serafina's face turned to chalk. Clara smiled just once and walked to the elevator. The doors opened. She stepped inside, box in hand, and as the door slid shut, she allowed herself one single shaky breath. Then she pulled out her phone. She didn't call a lawyer. She didn't call her husband. She hit a number on her speed dial. "Dad," she said, as the elevator began its descent. "It's done. He did it. He fired me." A deep, kind voice rumbled on the other end. "Are you all right, sweetheart?" "I'm fine, Dad. But Vanguard Equity is not. The rot is worse than we thought." "I'll be there in an hour," the voice said. "It's time I came out of retirement." Clara didn't live in a cramped one-bedroom apartment. She lived in a sprawling, 5-story brownstone on the Upper East Side, a fortress of old money and quiet elegance. The doorman, a kind man named Patrick, who had known her since she was a girl, rushed to take her box. "Miss Hayes," he said, his face creased with worry. "You're home early. Is everything all right?" "Everything is precisely as it should be, Patrick," Clara said, managing a smile. "Is my father here?" "Mr. Hayes is in the library, Mum. He's been waiting for you." She walked past the soaring ceilings and the original Rothko paintings in the foyer, her heels clicking on the marble. She entered the library, a room panelled in dark mahogany and smelling of old books and leather. Harrison Hayes stood by the window, looking out over the private garden. He was a man in his late 60s, but he radiated an energy that shamed men half his age. He wasn't tall, but he was broad, with a full head of white hair and eyes so blue they seemed to bore through steel. This was the man who had built Vanguard Equity Partners from nothing, a legendary, almost mythical figure on Wall Street. The press called him the Architect. For the last 5 years he had been happily retired, leaving the day-to-day to his hand-picked successor, David Morrison. He turned as she entered. "Clara." He enveloped her in a hug, his hand going to her belly. "And how is my grandchild?" "He's kicking," Clara smiled, leaning into him. "He's as indignant as I am." "He has my blood, after all," Harrison chuckled. He led her to a deep leather armchair and poured her a glass of water. "Tell me everything. From the top." Clara recounted the entire sordid affair. The Henderson call, the missed package, the lies, Serafina, the public humiliation. Harrison listened, his face impassive. He was a man who listened for a living, and his stillness was more terrifying than any rage. "He used the phrase, 'pregnancy brain'?" Harrison asked, his voice soft. "He did, and then he gestured to my stomach and said, 'I need sharks, not this.'" Harrison closed his eyes for a moment. When he opened them, the blue had turned to ice. "Julian Vance, I remember him. Wharton, same as you. Top of his class. I thought he was hungry. I didn't realize he was depraved." This had all been Clara's idea. A year ago, she had been a rising star at a rival firm, already a junior partner. But she'd been hearing things about her father's company. Rumors, whispers of a toxic Shark Tank culture that had taken root since his retirement. Talk of bullying, of shady accounting, of good people being pushed out. "It's my legacy, Dad," she had told him. "It's our name on the building. I won't let it be rotted from the inside." She'd had one condition. She would go in with her mother's maiden name, Hayes. No one would know who she was. She'd start as a floater, learn the systems, and find the source of the rot. Her father had argued, but she was as stubborn as he was. Her credentials were so good, she was placed as Julian Vance's secretary within a month. His reputation as a difficult manager was legendary, and no one else would take the job. "I thought he was just an arrogant bully, Dad," Clara said, sipping her water. "But this is criminal. Serafina Croft and he, they're stealing. Stealing. Harrison sat up. You have proof? More than proof, Clara said. She walked to the desk and pulled out a slim, encrypted flash drive. Julian thought I was reading baby magazines. I was running forensic accounting on his discretionary marketing funds, the ones he directs to Serafina. She plugged the drive into a laptop. Serafina isn't just his mistress. She's his launderer. 3 months ago, she incorporated a shell company, Croft Media Solutions. Since then, Julian has approved over $4 million in consulting fees to this company. The invoices are for market synergy analysis and brand strategy. They're boilerplate nonsense. She pulled up another file. Here are the bank transfers from Croft Media Solutions to an offshore account in the Caymans, an account held by a holding company. And guess who the sole director of that holding company is? Julian Vance, Harrison finished, his voice grim. He wasn't firing me because I'm pregnant, Clara said, the pieces clicking into place. He was firing me because I was there. I was the one who processed his expense reports. I was the one who saw the invoices. He and Serafina, they thought I was just a dumb, pregnant secretary. They got sloppy. They were afraid I was getting too close. The North Star package, Harrison said. It wasn't just to get you fired. It was a distraction, a big, messy, public execution to draw everyone's attention away from the real crime. Exactly. And they used my pregnancy as the perfect, believable excuse for my incompetence. Harrison stood and walked back to the window. The silence in the room was heavy. David Morrison, Harrison finally said. He's a good man, but he's blind. He wants to see the best in people. He let this happen. What do we do now? Clara asked. Harrison turned. The kindness was gone from his face, replaced by the cool, lethal focus of the architect. Now? Now we remind them whose name is on the building. He picked up his phone. Robert, get the jet ready. We're going to the office. And call an emergency meeting of the entire board of directors. Tell them, Harrison Hayes is back. He looked at his daughter, a fierce pride in his eyes. And Clara, it's time for you to change out of your secretary's uniform. You're going to need your Wharton suit for this. Julian Vance felt like a king. He had slept the sleep of the victorious. The North Star deal was a disaster, yes, but he had already spun it. He had spent all of Friday afternoon in crisis meetings with David Morrison, the CEO. David, I am shattered, Julian had said, a masterpiece of feigned grief. I trusted her. I think I was too sensitive to her condition. I didn't want to add to her stress, so I wasn't as vigilant. I blame myself. Morrison, a man who valued empathy, had bought it. It's a terrible lapse, Julian, but you're right. The timing, it's a mess. Don't worry. Our lawyers will handle the fallout. You just focus on the partnership. We need your leadership. The partnership. It was still his. He had cut the liability, and he was being rewarded for it. Now it was Monday morning. He walked into the lobby of the Vanguard Tower, his $3,000 leather shoes clicking on the granite. He nodded curtly to the security guard, his mind on Serafina, who was already upstairs. She had officially moved her things to Clara's old desk, right outside his glass cube. Everything was in its right place. The elevator was packed with junior analysts, all of whom went silent when he stepped in. He was a god to them. Terrifying, but a god. When he stepped out onto the 50th floor, however, the atmosphere was wrong. It wasn't the usual Monday morning hustle. It was silent, tense. Mary, the older assistant, was at her desk, her eyes red. When she saw Julian, she gave him a look of such pure, unadulterated contempt that it actually made him pause. "Good morning, Mary," he said. Mary just turned back to her screen. He shrugged it off. He walked toward his office. Serafina was not at her new desk. Strange. Then he saw it. An email flagged "Urgent Mandatory" had arrived at 8:01 a.m. Subject: Emergency Board and Senior Partner Meeting, 9 UAS a.m. Location: the Founders Boardroom, 52nd floor. Attendance: mandatory, no exceptions. Julian's heart gave a little thrill. This was it. The North Star fallout was over, and this was his promotion. They were gathering the partners to announce him. They were probably fast-tracking it to show the firm was stable, moving forward. He checked his reflection in the glass, straightened his Brioni tie. He was ready. He took the private executive elevator to the 52nd floor. This floor was for board meetings only. It was quiet, opulent, and smelled of old money and furniture polish. He pushed open the massive oak double doors to the founder's boardroom and stopped dead. The room was full. The entire executive board, all 12 members, were seated. David Morrison, the CEO, was there, looking pale and nervous, not at the head of the table but on the side. At the head of the table, in the high-backed chair that had sat empty for 5 years, was Harrison Hayes. Julian's blood turned to ice water. He had never met Harrison Hayes. He had only seen the oil portrait of him in the lobby. The man in the portrait was smiling. The man at the table was not. "Mr. Vance," Harrison said, his voice quiet but echoing in the cavernous room. "You're late. Take a seat." Julian's legs felt like lead. He fumbled into the only empty chair. It was at the far end of the table, opposite Harrison. He felt like he was being judged from a mile away. "Where is Serafina Croft?" Julian managed to ask. "Ms. Croft is indisposed," Harrison said. "She's with our head of security and our internal audit team. It seems there are some irregularities in her marketing budget. But we'll get to that." Julian's mouth went dry. This was not a promotion. "I have been retired for 5 years," Harrison began, his eyes sweeping the table, landing on every single board member. "I left this firm, Vanguard, in your hands. I trusted you to maintain the culture I built, a culture of integrity, of diligence, and of respect." He steepled his fingers, his icy blue gaze finally landing and staying on Julian. "Instead, I find a culture of bullying, of theft, and of staggering incompetence. Mr. Morrison, you were CEO. How did this happen?" David Morrison looked like he was going to be sick. "Harrison, I had no idea. The internal reports," Harrison cut him off, "were doctored. The profits from Mr. Vance's division, for example, have been exaggerated. His successes, it seems, were not his own." Julian gripped the arms of his chair. "Mr. Hayes, I don't know what you've been told, but my division is the most profitable in the firm. The Henderson call just last week." "Ah, yes. The Henderson call," Harrison said, a thin smile playing on his lips. "The one you brilliantly saved. A call where you miscalculated a client's exposure by 15%, and your secretary had to slide you the answer." Julian was speechless. How do you—" "I know," Harrison said, "because my head of internal review told me. You see, I've had someone on the inside for the last 8 months. Someone I trust implicitly. Someone with a Wharton MBA, a background in forensic accounting, and a vested interest in this company's good name." Harrison nodded to the double doors. "You can come in now." The doors opened. In walked Clara Hayes. She was not the Clara he knew. The mousy brown hair was pulled back into a severe, elegant chignon. The drab maternity blouses were gone, replaced by a dark navy blue Armani pantsuit, custom-tailored to accommodate her pregnancy. She wore her power as comfortably as he wore his arrogance. She looked, Julian realized with a jolt of pure terror, exactly like the man at the other end of the table. She was not carrying a box. She was carrying a leather-bound portfolio. "Clara," Julian breathed, his voice a dry rasp. The rest of the board was staring, their minds scrambling to connect the dots. "That's Ms. Hayes Donovan to you, Mr. Vance," Clara said, her voice clear and cold. She took a seat at the table, to the right of her father. "Clara Hayes Donovan, daughter of Harrison Hayes, and as of 8 a.m. this morning, the new Chief Operating Officer of Vanguard Equity Partners." David Morrison lunged forward. "Harrison, this is my daughter, David," Harrison snapped. "And she is the only person in this room who has done her job. Please, Clara, proceed." Clara opened her portfolio. "Good morning, gentlemen. For the last 8 months, I have been working as an executive assistant to Mr. Vance. My father and I were concerned about the cultural rot that was eroding this firm's foundation. We were right to be." She looked directly at Julian. Her eyes were not angry. They were worse. They were diagnostic. "Mr. Vance," she began, "on Friday, you fired me for gross negligence, specifically for failing to courier the North Star acquisition documents." You didn't send them," Julian stammered, falling back on his lie. "You left them in your desk. Serafina found them." "No," Clara said flatly. "I did not. On Wednesday at 4:51 p.m., I personally logged the package and placed it in the mailroom's secure bin. At 5:37 p.m., she nodded to a man in the corner who dimmed the lights and turned on the large projector screen. Ms. Serafina Croft entered the mailroom. The screen lit up with grainy, time-stamped security footage. Serafina clear as day, distracting the clerk and stealing the red envelope. A collective gasp went around the room. At 7:14 p.m., Clara continued, as the footage changed. Ms. Croft and Mr. Vance are seen entering his office. At 7:19 p.m., Ms. Croft is seen logging into my terminal, using my credentials. She proceeds to delete my confirmation email and the courier appointment. The video was silent, but the implications were deafening. Julian was white. "And at 7:21 p.m., Clara said, her voice dropping, Mr. Vance is seen taking the North Star package and placing it inside my desk drawer." The video showed him do it. The board turned as one to stare at him. You, Julian sputtered. "You set me up." "No, Julian," Clara said. "You set yourself up. I was just the secretary. I was just the hormonal, forgetful, pregnant woman. You never, ever thought I'd be a threat. You never thought I mattered. You were so blinded by your own arrogance and your affair that you committed mail fraud and conspiracy right in front of a security camera." "But why?" David Morrison asked, his face ashen. Why would you, Julian? Sabotage a $2 billion deal, just to fire a secretary? That," Harrison Hayes said, "is the billion-dollar question. Clara." Clara looked back at Julian. The look of a cold, satisfied predator was gone from his face. Now it was just the pathetic, sweaty fear of a man trapped. "He didn't fire me because he thought I was incompetent," Clara said to the board. "He fired me because he was terrified I was competent." She clicked to the next slide. It was a complex flowchart of bank accounts. Julian Vance and Serafina Croft were not just having an affair, Clara announced. They were embezzling. For the last 3 months, Mr. Vance has been approving ghost invoices from a shell marketing company. That company, Croft Media Solutions, was founded by and is solely owned by Ms. Croft. In 90 days, they have siphoned $4.2 million from this firm. She pointed to a line item. This $4.2 million was then wired to a holding company in the Cayman Islands, a holding company named J. Vance Capital. Ring any bells, Julian? Julian Vance made a sound, a low, strangled noise. "I processed those invoices," Clara said. "I saw the signatures. You got sloppy, Julian. You thought I was too stupid or too distracted by my condition to notice that you were approving multi-million-dollar invoices on a Friday afternoon without a single line of due diligence. You fired me to stop me from talking. You fabricated the North Star crisis to make my firing so spectacular, so public, that no one would ever believe a word I said. I would just be the crazy, pregnant secretary who cost us all." She stood up, slowly, and walked around the table until she was standing directly behind him. He was frozen, staring at the screen that showed his financial ruin. "You didn't fire me for your mistress, Julian," she whispered, so only he and the man next to him could hear. "You fired me for your greed. You just used my pregnancy as your excuse. You gestured to my child, my son, and called him a liability. You called me this." She moved back to her seat. "Mr. Vance, you are a thief. You are a conspirator. And worst of all, you are a fool." The heavy oak doors of the founder's boardroom shut with a final, damning click. The silence that fell was heavier than the wood. Harrison Hayes's words, "report," still hung in the air, a guillotine that had just dropped. Julian Vance, a man who had lived his entire life on a diet of adrenaline and other people's fear, was now a statue of pure, waxy terror. The two detectives, businesslike and unimpressed by the bespoke suit and the 52nd floor view, moved to his chair. "Mr. Vance, you are under arrest for conspiracy, wire fraud, and embezzlement," the taller detective said, his voice a monotone that cut through Julian's paralysis. "Please stand and place your hands behind your back." Julian finally broke. It wasn't a snap. It was a crumble. "No," he whimpered, a sound so pathetic it made the board members physically recoil. "No, wait, you don't understand. It was her. It was Serafina. She seduced me. She set this all up. She planted the files. It was her idea." Clara, who had remained standing, let out a sound of pure, unadulterated disgust. "Pathetic," she said, her voice clear and carrying. "Even now, even with the cuffs literally on their way to your wrists, you cannot take responsibility for a single one of your actions. You blame the woman you were sleeping with. You blame the woman you fired. You are a black hole of a man, Julian. Nothing is ever your fault." As the cold steel clicked shut around his wrists, Julian's terror-fueled denial finally cracked, revealing the raw, venomous hatred beneath. He surged to his feet, a snarling, cornered animal. "You!" he spat at Clara, his face purple. "A secretary. You set me up. This was all you." "I did my job, Julian," Clara said, her voice impossibly calm. "The one I was hired for, the one you paid me for. You just never bothered to ask what it was. You thought I was there to fetch your coffee. I was there to protect my family's name." Marcus Thorne, a senior partner and Julian's primary ally on the board, finally found his voice. "Harrison, this is madness," he sputtered, standing up. "Arresting a senior VP in the boardroom? The PR fallout. This is precipitous. We need to handle this internally." Harrison Hayes didn't even turn his head. "Sit down, Marcus," he said, his voice dangerously low. "You're embarrassed because you backed the wrong horse. You're part of the internal problem I'm handling." He nodded to the detectives. "Get him out of my sight." The detectives began to pull Julian toward the door. As he passed Clara, he lunged, his cuffed hands straining. "You'll run this company into the ground, you sentimental bitch. This place needs sharks, and you're just weak." Clara didn't flinch. She stood her ground, forcing the detectives to yank him back. She looked him dead in the eye, her gaze a surgeon's scalpel. My sentiment, Julian, is the one variable your arrogant mind never accounted for. My sentiment is for the 4,000 employees whose futures you gambled with. My sentiment is for the name my father built. You only accounted for your wallet. Enjoy your new accommodations. I hear the views are terrible. His shriek of rage was cut off as the doors closed behind him. The room exhaled. Harrison Hayes let the silence stretch for a beat before he spoke. As for Miss Croft, he said, she is in a conference room on the 40th floor with our audit team and her own lawyer. Faced with the video evidence, she has already provided a full confession, attempting, like Mr. Vance, to pin the entire scheme on him. It won't work. She will be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. He then turned his gaze, which had lost none of its icy fire, on the remaining men. And now, to the board. His eyes landed on David Morrison. The CEO looked 60 seconds from a heart attack. David, Harrison said, and the use of his first name was a judgment in itself. You are a good man. You are a kind man. You are not a leader. You let this infection fester in my company because you were too afraid to ask hard questions. You valued stability over integrity, and in doing so, you nearly cost us both. Morrison stood, his hands shaking. Harrison, I am so sorry. Clara, Ms. Hayes Donovan, I had no idea. I am terribly, terribly sorry for what he did to you. Clara cut him off, not with malice, but with precision. David, your job wasn't to have an idea. It was to know. You were the custodian of this firm, and you let the wolves into the nursery. Your apology is noted. Your resignation is accepted. You will leave with your full pension, but you will sign an NDA that ensures you never speak the name Vanguard again. Morrison nodded, utterly broken, and walked out of the room. Marcus, Harrison said, turning to the last dissenter. You backed him. You championed his shark mentality. You're out. Clean your desk. You can't do this, Marcus blustered. I can, Harrison said. This entire board is dissolved, effective immediately. It will be reconstituted under the new COO's direction by the end of the day. You can leave on your own, or you can follow Mr. Vance in cuffs for aiding and abetting. Your choice. Marcus Thorne, his face pale, fled the room. Finally they were alone. Just Harrison and Clara in the vast, silent boardroom. The morning sun streamed in, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. Harrison let out a breath he seemed to have been holding for 5 years. Well, Madam Coe, he said, a weary pride in his voice. Your first day has been eventful. Clara walked to the floor-to-ceiling window, looking down at the city 52 floors below. The same view Julian had prized. He wasn't the only rot, Dad, she said quietly. He was just the loudest. The culture here. It's broken. It's what you always taught me not to be. Harrison came to stand beside her, putting a hand on her shoulder. I know, he said, his voice thick with a rare emotion. I let it get away from me. I was so busy building the machine, I forgot about the people inside it. I was so afraid of being done, of being irrelevant in retirement. I let profit become a substitute for purpose. He turned to her, his blue eyes searching hers. That's why you are the new COO, not me. I'm going back into retirement, for real this time. This is your firm now, Clara. Fix it. Clara put her hand over his, her other hand resting on her belly. I'm scared, Dad. It's so broken. And with the baby. Your pregnancy isn't a liability, Clara, he said fiercely, echoing her earlier words. It's a perspective. It's your greatest asset. You're not just building for the next quarter. You're building for the next generation. That's what I lost. That's what you'll bring back. Now, shall we go reintroduce you to your new team?" They walked together to the 50th floor. The atmosphere was a funeral. The entire floor was frozen, watching them. They saw Julian's glass cube, now empty. They saw security guards boxing up Serafina's things from Clara's old desk. Clara walked to the center of the floor. Everyone stared, whispering. "Mary," Clara called out. Mary at her desk looked up, her eyes wide with terror. She thought she was next. She slowly approached. "Clara, Ms. Hayes. Ms. Hayes, Donovan." Clara smiled, a real, warm smile. "Mary, for 8 months, you were the only person on this floor who showed me genuine kindness. You have more integrity in your fingernail than Mr. Vance had in his entire body. You are my new executive administrator. Your title and your pay will reflect your seniority and your value. We start now." Mary's hands flew to her mouth, and she burst into tears of sheer, unadulterated relief. It was the first crack in the ice. That afternoon, Clara held an all-hands, town hall, in the firm's main atrium. She stood in front of 500 employees, her father standing off to the side, a proud observer. She used no microphone. Her voice, trained in Wharton lecture halls, carried. "My name is Clara Hayes Donovan," she began. "My father, Harrison Hayes, built this firm. For the last 8 months, you knew me as Clara Hayes. On Friday, many of you watched me get fired, humiliated, and escorted from this building. This morning, you watched Mr. Vance get arrested." A nervous murmur went through the crowd. "The era of Vanguard as a shark tank is over," she declared. "Sharks are lazy, solitary predators. They eat their own. From today, we will be a wolf pack. We are intelligent, we are strategic, we are collaborative, and we protect our own. This will be a place of integrity first. Profit second, because integrity, in the long run, is profit." She laid out her new vision. "The rot stops today. I am firing every manager in this firm with a credible HR complaint of bullying or harassment. Their positions will be filled from within. And my first act as COO," she paused, her hand going to her stomach, "is to announce the new Vanguard parental leave policy. 6 months, fully paid, for all employees, mothers, fathers, and adoptive parents, because family is not a liability. It is our foundation." A stunned silence. Then, led by Mary, a slow, building wave of applause that became a roar. The next 6 months were a war. The sharks she fired didn't go quietly. Marcus Thorne's allies tried to sue for wrongful termination. Clara countered, in person, with the meticulous evidence of their complicity and incompetence she had gathered as a secretary. Forbes magazine ran a scathing article titled, "The Heiress's Hobby. Can a Pregnant Idealist Run a Wall Street Firm?" Clara's response was to write a fiery op-ed in the Wall Street Journal, titled, "Yes, She Can, and She's Doing It." It went viral. She was vilified on financial TV as sentimental and naive, then praised by a new generation as a visionary. The firm's best and brightest, who had been suffocating under the old guard, flocked to her. Profits dipped for 1 quarter, then soared, driven by a new, massive, green energy fund she had personally championed. The legal reckoning was absolute. Serafina Croft, faced with the video and her own paper trail, folded completely. She testified against Julian, detailing his greed and his paranoia. She received 2 years in a low-security federal prison. Julian, blinded by his own narcissism, made the fatal mistake of refusing a plea deal. He was convinced he could charm a jury. The trial was a circus. He painted himself as a visionary, betrayed by a spurned lover and a conniving secretary. But the prosecution had Clara's meticulous notes, the high-definition security footage, and the bank transfers. The jury convicted him on all counts in under 45 minutes. At his sentencing, the judge, a woman in her 60s, looked down at him with contempt. "Mr. Vance," she said, "you are a man of profound arrogance and a complete lack of character. Your crimes were not of passion, but of a cold, calculated greed. But what the court finds most appalling is your cruel and unusual humiliation of an employee in a vulnerable condition. You used a woman's pregnancy as a weapon. You are, in short, a bully. You are sentenced to 8 years in a state penitentiary." He screamed, a high, thin sound of disbelief as he was led away. 8 months after the boardroom coup, the 50th floor was unrecognizable. It was bright. The glass cube of Julian's office had been dismantled, replaced by a large, open-plan collaborative workspace. People were talking, laughing, arguing over whiteboards. Clara sat in her new office, a warmer space with comfortable chairs, on the same floor as her team. She was on a conference call, finalizing the acquisition of a tech startup. Her desk was covered in reports, but also a small, silver-framed sonogram. She was in mid-sentence when she stopped, her breath catching. She smiled, a small, tired but triumphant smile. Mary, now her unflappable chief of staff, noticed immediately. "Ms. Hayes." It is," Clara breathed, closing her laptop. "Call my husband, and tell the Tokyo board. The call will have to be rescheduled for tomorrow morning. My son has decided on an earlier-than-expected arrival." Harrison Hayes met her at the elevator, holding a brand-new baby carrier, beaming. "Ready, Madam Coe?" "More than ready, Dad," she said, squeezing his arm. As the elevator doors closed, the floor didn't panic. They didn't whisper. They stood, and they applauded their leader. Clara Hayes Donovan had built a company that could run without her for a few hours, or a few months. The new foundation was strong. It wasn't built on fear. It was built on trust. What a story of karma and consequences. It just goes to show that you never, ever know who you're talking to. Julian's arrogance and cruelty weren't just his moral failing. They were his financial ruin. He saw a pregnant secretary as a weak, disposable problem, but he was actually abusing the most powerful person in the building. Clara proved that true strength isn't about yelling, bullying, or wearing an expensive suit. It's about intelligence, patience, and knowing exactly when to make your move. She didn't just get revenge. She rebuilt an entire company in her own, stronger image. What did you think of Julian's takedown? Was it satisfying? Let me know in the comments what your favorite part of the story was. If you loved this story, please hit that like button. Share this video with someone who needs to see justice served, and make sure you subscribe to the channel so you never miss another real-life drama. We have new stories coming every week. Thanks for listening.